Hello everyone, this is the Unit 2 slide presentation. It reinforces what you're going to learn by reading the written introduction. So now let's start talking about the unit, which is entitled Moral Theories. A couple of things you want to think about as you go through this is that as you do the readings and the screenings, remember that each unit builds on the next. So always keep in mind how what you learned in the previous unit relates to what you're learning at the present. It will make the course more meaningful and more interesting to you and to your fellow participants on the discussion forum. And also it can boost your grade if you make relationships or like connections rather between different theories. Let's first take a look at a little cartoon image that I put up for Unit 2, the investigation. In this, you'll notice that there are all different types of people surrounding this rather normal, regular kind of looking, plain old guy who apparently is a suspect for something. And somebody, I assume it's the police, are looking for him. So they're asking these people who allegedly saw him what he looks like. They all give different, totally different descriptions, which is kind of the irony of the comic, based on their self, based upon how they think of other people. So the point of the cartoon is that depending upon who you are, depending upon where you're from, your perceptions of people will be different. You want to keep that in mind and how that relates to the rest of the reading as you're going along. Now the readings include something called the bystander effect, which there are numerous examples of what you're going to be seeing. There's little video clips, there's some readings. I'm sure when you see it, you'll have an understanding of it, and also you probably can think of incidents where you might have actually been a participant in a bystander effect. Some questions I ask about bystanders. Most of us intuitively know that it's wrong to stand by and do nothing when I'm at home and somebody is looking at me. My daughter's looking at me like I'm insane, like I'm talking to myself. Anyway, what was I talking about? Anyway, the bystander effect. If you've started reading the articles, you know that it has something to do with people who happen upon an incident that perhaps is, unpleasant, where they probably should call for help and they don't. So the point I was making before was the fact that we all know that it's wrong to stand by and do nothing if somebody, for example, appears to be being beaten up, murdered, or dying. But the question is the media, with their sensationalist articles and videos that demonize the bystanders, are they passing judgment just for the purpose of drumming up more readers? Because we really don't know what these individuals are thinking, or if they did try to help. So it's something to think about when you're reading that. The second article is called The Unselfish Trap. The author, Harry Brown, questions the reasoning behind putting others' happiness before your own. If you remember the old proverb, it is better to give than to receive. Probably have been taught this. According to Harry Brown, he thinks the opposite. He says, well, maybe it is better to do for yourself than to do for others, because it makes you happy, and therefore people around you will be happy. So it's a refreshing opinion that may seem as if it's taboo to even consider the idea of self-interest. Colin McGinn's article, which you'll also read, I shouldn't say article, these are both essays, is similar to The Unselfish Trap in that it deals with self-interest. He makes a compelling interest for being bad. Being good when you feel like doing something bad is perhaps not being true to yourself. The Moral Instinct is another thought-provoking editorial this time by a very well-known Harvard psychologist named Steven Pinker. He wrote this for the New York Times, and again he questions our perception of goodness. Probably to me, one of the parts of the writing that resonates for me is when he discusses the fact that people can often turn on and off morality as if it has a switch. He also talks about how behaviors and lifestyle choices that were once considered moral failings are now viewed as amoral. In other words, they're really not viewed as being right or wrong. I think you'll find some of the examples in that article very thought-provoking, especially within the context of the unit. Then we move on to advertising and ethics. This is always one of my favorite parts of this unit because I happen to be a very visual person. The first article you're going to read it's actually not an article, it was a paper that was presented called Ethics in Advertising. The second article, which is, actually it's not an article, it's a chapter in a book called Aunt Jemima, the Most Battered Woman in History. And I'm sure you've all seen or had Aunt Jemima frozen waffles or syrup or pancake mix. And the image of the woman on the current packaging, and this is an example of her pancake mix, she kind of looks like a pleasant housewife, kind of conservative, probably a mom. I mean, if you were to profile this person. So this has been around since the new millennium. Now what we're going to do is go backwards in time to 1955. At this time, Aunt Jemima was represented as a plump older woman, perhaps in her early to mid-50s, whose dress resembles that of a service worker. You'll notice in the upper right-hand corner there is a white man's hand eating the pancakes that she presumably made. And it's very typical in these advertisements for her to be standing over or serving a white family. She usually always made some sort of a wholesome statement having to do, of course, with the goodness of these pancakes in a language that bordered on illiterate. Aunt Jemima actually aged in reverse as her appearance went from younger to 1909, when you see her represented here as a skinny old decrepit housekeeper cook, maybe in her mid to late 70s, who very much resembles a slave in her dress and in her headscarf. In fact, the original Aunt Jemima model was a freed slave. Not only did Aunt J get younger throughout the decades, but she also became more intelligent. So you'll notice in this particular advertisement, at the top of it, it says, "Eyes in town, honey." So you see the colloquialism as represented in a supposed illiterate slave. And at the bottom right, you'll notice that they have a free giveaway of what appears to be a ceramic slave family if you purchase the Aunt Jemima flower. Some other advertisements that we're going to be taking a look at, and this one isn't actually in the readings. This is sort of a bonus or an extra. This is a French advertisement, and it is, the translation reads something to the effect of, "Don't become a slave to smoking," or "Smoking makes you become a slave," or something like that. I think it's pretty self-evident why it's morally sort of ambiguous, because on one hand, it's making a statement that's sort of anti-smoking, but at the same time, it's portraying something that very much appears like pedophilia. This advertisement is for Heinz hot ketchup. Again, I think it's pretty obvious why many people would consider this tasteless and sort of morally ambiguous. It resembles a woman, naked woman in a compromising position, and they're using chicken, and I don't know what those other gross looking things are. In the next advertisement, this is a Calvin Klein print, and it actually was eventually banned because so many women complained about it, because it clearly appears as if these men are violently raping the woman. One man is pulling her hair. Some of you may have seen this. This was from Bloomingdale's, probably from about, could have been last Christmas of 2015, perhaps. In any case, if you read the copy, it says, "Spike your best friend's eggnog." When they're not looking, the male is looking cunningly at the woman who's laughing, and presumably he's about to roofie her. And that too is, again, fairly obvious probably why it might be morally objectionable to some people. And lastly, we are going to take a look at a fictional representation of modern day market advertising techniques in the films called The Joneses. You can stream this on Amazon or Netflix, and if you're very good at finding free films online, you might get lucky with this one. As I mentioned in the unit intro, the written unit intro, you don't have to watch the entire film. Certainly 30 minutes is enough to get the gist of what's really happening. However, the premise of the film is really probably fascinating enough that most students in the past end up watching the entire film. It's a narrative with a subtext of consumerism, greed, envy, and it really portrays capitalism in a very ugly light. The film actually received very positive reviews, and some critics did comment on the film's romantic side story, which toward the end gets a little bit corny, probably to appeal to a multitude of audiences. It is, after all, a Hollywood film, of course, but at its core, it's still a delightful film, and it has a message that is very relevant to this course. Remember, as you read, watch, and observe all of the media in the unit, be very aware of the impact of the visual elements on what you're going to be discussing in this week's forum. It's really key. That's kind of the thing we're concentrating on. That's all for now. We'll meet again on the discussion forum.